From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Monday, March 3, 2025. China's ambassador to Australia has warned Anthony Albanese that banning Chinese artificial intelligence app DeepSeek is an overstretch that could undermine trade and technological progress. That's after DeepSeek was banned from all Commonwealth government devices. School kids later this month will celebrate Harmony Day with multicultural food and costumes. But the Australian Human Rights Commission says the day should be a protest, not a celebration, and the name Harmony Day hides Australia's systemic racism. Those stories are live now at theaustralian.com.au. A meeting with King Charles and new pledges of support. Europe is rolling out the red carpet for Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky after a stunning shouting match inside the Oval Office between Zelensky, US President Donald Trump and Vice President JD Vance. It's completely shaken the world's understanding of how the Ukraine-Russia war can possibly end in peace. Instead of signing a deal about joint exploration of rare earths like lithium and titanium, Zelensky left the White House in shock. Today, I'm joined by strategic analyst and The Australian's columnist Peter Jennings to understand how things went so wrong and what happens now.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting? No.
This is how it ended up. But this is how it began, like all the media calls in the Oval Office.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to have President Zelensky of Ukraine.
President Donald Trump and a foreign leader, in this case Volodymyr Zelensky, sat side by side in pale yellow jacquard armchairs.
And we have something that is a very fair deal. And we look forward to getting in and digging and working and getting some of the rare earth. But it means we're going to be inside, and it's a big commitment from the United States, and we appreciate working with you very much.
It was warm.
Thanks so much, Mr. President. Thank you for the invitation. And really, I hope that this first document, will be a first step to real security guarantees for Ukraine, our people, our children.
It was moving.
These crazy Russians, that they stolen 20,000 of children, Ukrainian children. They changed their names, and now they're in Russia. We want to bring them back.
It was funny, with some light-hearted banter about Europe.
They're our friends, and they are our very supportive partners. They really gave a lot, Mr. President. They did.
They gave a lot, but they gave much less.
No.
Much less.
No. No.
Don't argue.
No.
Okay.
And it looked to be the moment where Zelensky re-entered the peace process after he last week expressed fears he was being excluded from talks between the US and Russia.
That's what I do. My whole life, that's what I do, is make deals. And I'm in the middle of a mess, because this is a real mess. It's a very dangerous one. If this doesn't get solved now, it's not going to get solved for a long time. So I hope we're going to get it solved.
They were about to sign a deal and have lunch. And then JD Vance, sitting beside Trump, chimed in.
For 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy.
That triggered a response from Zelensky.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Zelensky said he signed a ceasefire with Vladimir Putin in 2019 and that Putin, whom he called a terrorist, just ignored it.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
I found it quite shocking.
Peter Jennings is a Director of Strategic Analysis Australia and a former senior defence official. He also writes columns in The Australian.
It was a pretty sad day for America and for America's allies. What should have been a fairly polite meeting and greeting in front of the media was in some respects misread by President Zelensky of Ukraine. I think he perhaps didn't quite understand the purpose of what that particular meeting was going to be. And so he genuinely seemed to think that what he was there to do was to be an equal expressing his own opinion in discussion with the president. And that was obviously not Trump's expectations or the media's or JD Vance's. And so what I think we're seeing is really a failure to pre-plan and work through these types of encounters in ways that would normally happen at the top level of politics in most countries.
Into this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Count once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
Vance just seemed to blow his stack. He clearly did not like what he took to be Zelensky kind of rudely pushing back against the president on some issues, mostly around security guarantees and how far one could trust Putin. This was very definitely an area of discussion that should have been happening behind closed doors. I'm surprised that in getting to this point, Zelensky had not had the opportunity to have this conversation with Trump privately, to get some of those views out of his system. I mean, it's hardly surprising that the leader of Ukraine feels that one can't trust the Russians after losing hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians killed, after seeing his cities bombed, civilians killed, children abducted, all of those things. To imagine that Zelensky is just going to sit there meekly in the Oval Office and agree that it's time to stop the killing and we must all now, join hands, I think was just an unacceptable ask. But nevertheless, Vance seemed to take the view that what was required of Zelensky was that he accept the president's view, and then they'd have a nice lunch and sign this agreement on, as Trump kept calling it, raw earths, but which the rest of us know as rare earths. I thought that it was extremely intemperate of the vice president to do that. He effectively derailed the conversation. I've seen since, Claire, there's a number of people claiming that somehow this is a masterful stroke of Trump's strategy. I don't see that. I think what Trump was actually wanting to do was to get an agreement signed with Zelensky, which would enable the president to claim that they were moving towards peace in Ukraine. And effectively, more than anyone else, it was the vice president which got in the way of that outcome. So there's an issue that I think is going to have to be worked out in future as relations between an impatient and clearly very smart but somewhat angry vice president, JD Vance, and Trump, who's really not looking for others to steal centre stage. I think that's going to be a fascinating relationship to watch over the next few years.
Yeah, you could feel the rage emanating from JD Vance. It seemed very genuine, didn't it, that he was angry?
He's an angry young man going places quickly, very smart, very able. He raised to me quite spurious views about Zelensky being rude because he was rude enough to have his own opinion in the Oval Office.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you? You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war,
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait
answer?
a minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
But, we had the spectacle of seeing Vance just a week or two ago at the Munich Security Conference, basically giving a whole bunch of European leaders addressing down about their failings. I think whilst Vance clearly has the brains and the ambition, he's not yet shown that he's got the temperament to engage in international relations on behalf of the United States. Yes, we all understand that there's a new administration and that they want to do things dramatically differently. But is America going to have any friends if this is Vance's approach to how he wants to engage with the allies, let alone with the enemies? Vance doesn't seem to have got the memo that what Trump wants from his cabinet is submission more than anything else. But I reckon this is going to become an issue between the two of them.
Coming up, Trump wants to be considered the new Winston Churchill. How's that going? That's after the break.
But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing. All right, I think we've seen enough. What do you think? Huh? This is going to be great television, I will say that.
Trump sought to assert himself in this meeting and spoke quite harshly to Zelensky. Then he observed that it was great television. How do you interpret Donald Trump's behaviour in that meeting and what it tells us about his perception of what both Vance and Zelensky were doing?
Trump's assessment of Ukraine's position is actually quite accurate. He doesn't explain this in ways which are terribly diplomatic or use the sorts of language that people use when talking about international affairs. I think they will continue to fight. I think that Ukraine will remain defiant of Russia. But Trump's sort of big picture assessment of their position is right. Although he's not sold it very well, the idea of this deal, as he would call it, over rare earths is actually a pretty good opportunity for Ukraine to have American industry come into Ukraine in a big way to generate wealth, which is not being generated at the moment because the rare earths are not being exploited, and that Zelensky should have signed it. The president had sort of worked through this in his own mind, but it seems that the administration had not taken the trouble to sort of privately talk Zelensky through why this was probably the best deal he was going to get. And, Zelensky himself, whilst I'm very sympathetic towards his desire to want to have high-level security guarantees provided to Ukraine, ideally in the form of NATO membership, that's obviously just not going to happen right now.
Trump accused Zelensky of toying with World War III. I've read some analysts comparing this video, this vision from the Oval Office, as like watching the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which of course precipitated World War I. What's your view? Is it as scary as that, or is that hyperbole?
I think it's hyperbole. I do not think that Putin has the least interest or desire to extend this war in a way which would turn it into World War III. And sort of implicit in that line is the possible use of nuclear weapons, for example, or the arrival of American military forces directly into the conflict. My evidence for saying that I think this is unlikely is that it hasn't happened, Claire, not in 3 years. What is likely to bring about a larger scale war in Europe is if the Americans make it clear that they're quitting the continent and they're not going to be prepared to involve themselves in European security. Part of the Trump-Zelensky discussion was sort of around that theme. When they were getting into their shouting moment, Zelensky was sort of saying to Trump, hey, well, there's an ocean between you and the threat, but it's going to catch up with you eventually.
During the war, Everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position.
And that's one of the Ukrainian perspectives, is they see themselves at the front line of a broader conflict protecting Europe. And the Americans, I think, at least under the Trump administration, don't build a connection into seeing that that's something that's directly relevant to their security. So there's a failure of strategic perception. But are we really facing World War III? As we saw in the lead up to the Second World War and in the very early stages of the Second World War, what gave Germany confidence to attack the democracies at that time was a sense that appeasement was going to lead the democracies to give way to Germany's aspirations for control of what they would call German territory in neighbouring states.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine.
It was appeasement that led to the Second World War, not deterrence. I look at Donald Trump, I can respect a lot of what Trump is doing, but, you know, he's got a bust of Winston Churchill in the Oval Office that was sort of looking down at this discussion taking place.
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall never surrender.
Trump wants to be like Winston Churchill, but at the moment he's behaving like Neville Chamberlain. He's being more inclined to, I think, give credit to Putin. And I think Zelensky is absolutely right to say, how can you trust this guy? This is the impasse that we're in right now.
Peter Jennings is a Director of Strategic Analysis Australia and a former senior defence official. You can read his razor-sharp analysis anytime at theaustralian.com.au.